If Orange Cassidy is one of the best wrestlers in the world, then wrestling must be awful now. I love Cassidy, but he is not one of the best wrestlers in the world. Maybe the best at comedy wrestling, but even that is debatable because Colt Cabana, Kikutaro, and Kushida. Could you elaborate on Orange Cassidy being among the best in the world? I agree with most of your opinions, but I'm very far from being impressed by the guy enjoying it. I'm curious to know why you would praise him so highly. But now I hear him say Orange Cassidy is one of the best wrestlers in the world. Orange Cassidy, maybe he's having an off day. I would not consider him one of the best wrestlers in the world. I don't think he's that good. He's not really anything special.
I don't feel anything about it.
I'm not wet enough. And I'm gonna get more wet.
Alright, so before I can properly go into making the case for Orange Cassidy as one of the best wrestlers in the world, I think it's first important that we all understand what the act is about. You've probably seen him perform on AEW, or you're familiar with his indie work, but I don't think it was ever summed up any better than by the man himself in the wonderful mini-documentary, The Comedy in Wrestling by Kenny Johnson.
When I describe to people who Orange Cassidy is, he is a wrestler who doesn't want to wrestle. Whatever he can do just to get by is what he's going to do.
I think that understanding this kayfabe aspect of Cassidy's character unlocks a lot of what he does in matches to larger audiences. The character gains some actual purpose and motivation, or a lack thereof. The joke doesn't happen just to happen, it has an element of reality to it that allows it to work even within the confines of professional wrestling. As with most comedy workers, I find that Cassidy works best when he allows this idea to inform his actions within the kayfabe of pro wrestling. For me, it loses some of its potency when it introduces things that push the boundaries of reality, like his sunglasses transferring his personality onto other wrestlers. The joke works best when Cassidy's opponent reacts as a straight man, just naturally progressing with the combat in reaction to an inexplicable character. On a meta level, Cassidy exists in a wrestling landscape where so many people seem to be convinced that more is more is more. Cassidy makes a complete mockery of that idea. He takes the less is more concept to its comedic extreme in the way Fujita Shiozaki took it to a more serious extreme. It's a great commentary on pro wrestling, intentional or not. And on a personal level, trying to get through life by exerting the least amount of effort possible is truly aspirational for anyone living under the crushing weight of capitalism. Society instills in us very early on that only with hard work can you succeed. We're taught that if we fail, it's our own fault because we just didn't try hard enough. That's a lie, of course. Most people recognize this fact. They live in its harsh reality every day. It's hard to want to try when you know that it doesn't really mean it'll get you anywhere. Orange Cassidy's character taps into that very real fact of life. It's a perfect escapist fantasy. Succeed in your craft and be wildly popular despite doing the absolute bare minimum. It has the same kind of awe-inspiring effect of babyfaces from the past. It's instant, and it strikes a chord for both casual TV audiences and hardcore wrestling fans. If hard work doesn't guarantee success, why bother at all? So let's actually get into the nitty-gritty of why I made this video. A lot of people seem to base their thoughts on Orange Cassidy on the comedic aspects of his gimmick. From that point, people make up their minds, which is fine. If this isn't something you want in your wrestling, then there's likely no changing your mind anyway. But none of that actually changes the fact that Orange Cassidy is legitimately one of the most capable in-ring workers in the world. The thing about being a comedic wrestler is that it requires one of the most important skills that any wrestler of any genre should have: impeccable timing. This makes his comeback segments all the more exciting because he's a master of pacing out his ring work to naturally build towards a finish. Cassidy often does this with a lot of thought for his ring work as well. Given that his character naturally lulls his opponents into underestimating him on a kayfabe level, it's all the better that so much of his in-ring offense is built around tricks and traps. His lucha-influenced training means that he's a master of evasion and manipulating momentum to allow him to maneuver his opponents into exactly the position that he wants. He does this with a mix of high-flying and clever pinfall maneuvers, but he also has a couple of big bombs like the beach break that really add a lot to the deeper end of his matches. But outside of the wide range of his arsenal, there's also a lot of clever structural work going on beneath the surface here. Most of Orange Cassidy's matches follow the traditional formula of the babyface shine, heel heat, and comeback into finishing stretch. What makes Cassidy's comeback so wonderful outside of the dynamic shift from sloth-like to ball of energy is the way he's able to set up his opponents for his finishes. One of Cassidy's primary finishing moves is the mousetrap pinning combination. He often sets this up by cutting off his opponent's momentum by attacking the knee, often with a knee breaker against the shoulder. Although Cassidy doesn't often go for leg-based submissions, weakening the limb often sets up Cassidy's opponents just long enough for him to grab the mousetrap and seal the win. Outside of that, Cassidy's also shown himself to be rather versatile with the roles that he plays in the ring. While we often associate him with being the perennial underdog, he can actually work in control pretty well. We see this a lot in his intergender work against the likes of Kylie Ray or even Chris Statlander. While he's never really a heel, he can believably play the champion in control without ever betraying anything about his persona. That being said, his best work is as an underdog because many people have talked about it before, but Orange Cassidy's best trait is his ability to connect with an audience. It's actually not hard to see why. On the surface, there's the comedic value of his gimmick. You might catch it on AEW television or see a gif of him and find it funny. Humor's always a good start since it disarms the viewer and makes the wrestler instantly more likable. That the joke taps into something so relatable as we'd previously discussed only makes that initial connection all the more powerful. But anyone who continues to watch Orange Cassidy over time finds that if their enjoyment had been ironic to begin with, it often gives way to something far more sincere and earnest. I think this is because in the ring, all while performing his bits and signature joke spots, Cassidy almost always stays true to the reality of the professional wrestling contest. This translates best through his selling and his comebacks. Cassidy is an excellent seller because his character often provokes violent reactions from his more heel-oriented opponents. Perhaps one of the more notable examples of this was his match against Pac from last year's AEW Revolution event. Once Pac gets sick of letting Cassidy play his games, he absolutely batters Cassidy, who ends up looking like even more of a hero in the process. Cassidy's abilities as a plucky babyface are so powerful that they can even compensate for the weaknesses of his opponents. One of his most impressive performances was in his first singles match against Chris Jericho, a much older and slower opponent. Cassidy's bumping and selling for Jericho's offense pretty much makes that match watchable. It's no surprise that Cassidy always gets so wildly popular wherever he shows up. Everything from his mannerisms to his ring work is just so effortlessly cool. It's a gimmick, sure, but it's one that comes off with so much sincerity that fans simply can't help but respond to it. Perhaps my favorite little wrinkle in his matches are the late-game soft slaps he uses after he's taken a beating. In the moment, you can't really tell if he's still playing mind games with his opponent or if he's just genuinely too hurt to throw hands. It's such a clever detail that adds another layer to his work beyond just the superficial comedy of his gimmick. Cassidy's just so expressive in everything he does, and since his character covers the range of lazy sloth to fiery babyface, he actually gets to cover a really wide range of emotions in his matches. But then again, it's probably not surprising that he's capable of having such engrossing physical performances, given that
I don't know what this is, yeah.
Y'all know that Orange Cassidy was Fire Ant, right? I can only imagine that the violent reaction that comes from labeling Orange Cassidy as one of the best wrestlers in the world is directly related to people not knowing that for over a decade, Cassidy wrestled as one of the most celebrated independent workers in America. So, sorry to those of you that like to keep this kayfabe distinction alive, but if you truly want to have an understanding of Cassidy's potential and capabilities as a wrestler, you have to look at his work as Fire Ant. From the mid-2000s up to 2019, Fire Ant carved out an incredible resume of matches and performances as a member of the Chikara roster. In fact, in 2008 and 2009, he's a key player in two of the best American independent matches of that decade. The Young Lions Cup final against Vin Gerard and the Lucha de Apuestas tag match against Fist are some of the best wrestling matches of the 2000s anywhere in the world. Fire Ant only gets better with time. Although his Chikara matches never quite reach the same heights of those two that I mentioned, I'd say that the wrestler himself only continued to develop his skill set. He would bulk up with time, allowing him to have more snap and crisp behind his strikes, all while continuing to hone the non-verbal expressiveness that allowed him to be so sympathetic to the crowd even while wearing a mask. The light-hearted nature of Chikara means that we can also see Fire Ant had a talent for the timing and comedic nature of pro wrestling very early on. There's so much in Fire Ant's career to look back on to prove just how great the man underneath the mask is. From performances as a young, plucky underdog, to being a more capable, seasoned performer developing the skill set he needs to be a convincing limb seller, to even being someone who could believably pose a threat to some of the toughest and grittiest wrestlers in the world. Because of Chikara's focus on tag team wrestling, Fire Ant also gets to showcase incredible versatility as both a singles, tag, and trios performer. His tag work is particularly impressive for how he can be both the proverbial hot tag, all the puns intended, or be a believable Ricky Morton character selling for the heels. All in all, outside of maybe a major run as a heel, Orange Cassidy under the mask as Fire Ant pretty much did everything there is to do in a company during his time in Chikara, and whatever he was given to do, he often did it well.
It's fine, it's fine, it's fine.
I hope that I've been able to make a decent case for Orange Cassidy with this video as a truly compelling performer that's worth your time and attention. In the course of this project, I watched and rated 94 of his matches from his time as Fire Ant up to his current day run in AEW as Orange Cassidy. I'll leave the link to the list of matches and my rankings in the description below so that you can pick out some of the more recommended matches. I think Cassidy's a great example of someone who draws such an immediate reaction to what he does that people often get set in their opinions of him before probing even further. It's always worth being curious and pushing past what you see. Sometimes you'll be surprised about what you find. Or don't. Whatever.
It's Wednesday today, maybe I'll be on TV tonight.
Thank you everybody for watching this video all the way through to the end. As usual, I want to send a very special shout out to all my supporters on Ko-fi. Thank you to my one-time supporters in Danny Boyer, Connor Burnett, Psycho Driver 91, and Arthur Prather II. And a huge special thank you to all my monthly supporters in Eddie Roberts, James Draper, Chick Fritz, Matt Brummett, Jacob Dickens, Smart Down, Spiders in My Bed, Tyler Kuhn Williams, Don O'Matic, Joe Humphreys, Arch Stanton, Brendan McCarthy, Timothy R. Buchner, and Henry. You guys are absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you guys want to do the same, check me out at my Ko-fi account. The link is in the description below. You guys are wonderful. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a good one.